Commissioner Gordon, Bane has escaped.
The prison you live in has no locks, no guards, no walls, just a viewpoint. That's it. Your paradigm is in an external structure. It's the lens through which you interpret everything. You don't see life as it is, you see it as you are. And the tragedy? Most people will die inside the same lens they were handed in childhood. They will mistake inherited belief for universal truth. They will follow rituals they never questioned. They will defend identities they didn't choose. And they will wonder why nothing ever changes. But if the lens is warped, the world will always appear broken. That's why breakthrough doesn't come from action. It comes from seeing differently. And once your paradigm shifts, the world bends, not because the rules changed, but because you finally saw what was always there. You call it reality, but it's a filter, a subconscious script projected onto your daily experience. You think you're reacting to facts, but you're actually responding to the meanings you've given them. Two people can experience the same event. One breaks, one builds. Why? Not because of circumstance, but perspective. Paradigm. One sees pain as punishment, the other sees pain as permission. You are not defined by what happens. You are defined by the meaning your paradigm attaches to it. And until you change the source of those interpretations, you will relive the same patterns in different costumes under different names. Look closely at your beliefs, not the ones you post, not the ones you say, the ones you live. The ones that dictate your hesitation, your tone, your ambition. These beliefs are the scaffolding of your reality, and they are rarely yours. You absorbed them from parents, from media, from failure, from moments you never revisited but allowed to define you. And every belief becomes a boundary, a mental fence that tells you what's safe to pursue and what's dangerous to dream. Change the belief, and the boundary evaporates. You thought life had limitations. No, your paradigm did. When people say life is unfair, what they're really saying is, my lens is distorted. Because fairness, like success, like failure, is not objective, it's perceptual. One person sees rejection as an ending, another sees it as refinement. Same moment, different meaning, paradigm. The moment you begin to interrogate your lens, you'll discover that most of your suffering came not from events, but from interpretation. You weren't destroyed by the experience, you were destroyed by what you decided it meant. That decision was filtered through your paradigm, and now that paradigm governs your identity like an invisible tyrant. You are not your thoughts, you are the architect of them. But if you've never redesigned the blueprint, then your architecture is accidental, and accidental architecture leads to chaos. A life where you build towers out of fear and then wonder why no one lives inside them. Paradigm is the design. It is the foundational belief system that either invites expansion or cements mediocrity. If you view struggle as evidence of failure, you will avoid the very path that would transform you. But if your paradigm interprets resistance as a necessary gatekeeper of evolution, you will walk toward pain with purpose. Same life, new architecture. To change your paradigm, you must betray your old self. You must confront the part of you that clings to familiarity, even when it's toxic. And this will feel like death, because the current paradigm is safe. It has rules, it has rituals, it has predictability. Your mind would rather be safely miserable than riskily free. That is the war. The paradigm keeps you calm in chains. Liberation, on the other hand, is chaotic, disorienting. You have to relearn how to think, how to want, how to speak. But that discomfort is the cost of sovereignty. You cannot carry your old lens into a new future. Most people will try to change their lives by manipulating the external. More hours, new location, different habits. But if the inner lens stays the same, the outcome resets. That's why people loop. They escape one prison only to recreate it in a different city, under a different name. Because they never addressed the lens, they just swapped the wallpaper. Paradigm change is violent. It kills illusions. It rips comfort apart, but it is the only doorway to true transformation. The most dangerous paradigm is the one that disguises limitation as logic. Be realistic. Don't get your hopes up. That's just how life is. These phrases are not wisdom, they are chains, spoken by people who stopped growing and want you to sit beside them. But you're not meant to live their script. You're meant to rewrite your own. And that begins with shattering every assumption you've never questioned. Why do you think success is rare? Why do you believe struggle equals suffering? Why do you accept that some dreams are too much? Question everything. Burn what doesn't stand. This is your pivot, not when you change your habits, when you change the mindset that created them. Identity is downstream of paradigm. You cannot act like a king with a peasant's lens. You cannot build an empire if your blueprint was designed to survive famine. That's why so many people self-sabotage. They act bigger than their paradigm, and their internal operating system panics. It pulls them back into alignment, not with reality, with belief. The solution: upgrade the belief, rewrite the operating system, install a new lens. Your thoughts don't drift freely. They're pulled, tugged by an unseen force beneath your awareness. That force has a name: paradigm. It's the psychological gravity field you live inside. Every interpretation, every decision, every belief subtly curved toward the same mental center. The same assumptions, the same emotional terrain. And the most seductive part, it feels like free will. You think you're exploring, you think you're questioning, but you're orbiting around the same doubts, the same language, the same internal ceiling. Paradigm creates a loop, and unless you recognize the orbit, you'll confuse movement for progress. You'll run faster and faster, and wonder why the view never changes. You don't need more information. You need escape velocity. More books won't save you. More strategies won't rescue you. You could spend a lifetime consuming insight and still end up in the same mental zip code, because you're absorbing content through a filter that distorts it. You take wisdom and contort it to match your current identity. You take possibility and downsize it to fit your comfort zone. That's the trap of gravity. You cannot transcend it while thinking inside of it. To break orbit, you need altitude, not intellect. A new vantage point, something that lifts you high enough to see the paradigm at work instead of being its passenger. Only from above can you map the territory you've mistaken for truth. What's required is not more effort, but elevation. When astronauts first saw Earth from space, something permanent shifted in the human psyche. That's called the overview effect. And you need your own version of it, not through a telescope, but through radical self-awareness. You need to lift above your patterns, above your scripts, above the internal bureaucracy that has micromanaged your growth for years. The part of you that says, "We don't do that. That's too risky. That's not who I am." That's not protection. It's gravity. It's the old center pulling you back. You're not lazy, you're misaligned. You've been building inside a system that was never designed for your future, only your survival. Your paradigm was shaped in scarcity, in defense, in appeasement. It's not evil, it kept you alive, but it's outdated. And every time you try to act bigger than it allows, it corrects you. Subtly, persuasively. That's not realistic. Be careful, play it smart. But those aren't strategies, they're tethers. The gravity of old belief disguised as wisdom. And unless you shift your vantage point, you'll mistake the chain for a compass. To see the paradigm, you must leave it. Step outside your normal environment. Challenge your daily input. Speak with people who terrify your comfort, not because they're reckless, but because they've learned to breathe at altitudes you've never reached. Their thoughts don't bend toward safety. Their decisions aren't coded in apology. And being near them feels offensive at first, like heresy. That's how you know they're touching a different paradigm. And if you can observe without defending, something rare happens. You begin to glimpse what thinking can be like without the old gravity pulling it down. When you get high enough, you realize your problems were never global. They were local. A product of your altitude. You weren't cursed. You weren't broken. You were trapped inside a gravitational loop, and every solution you tried only reinforced the loop because it was crafted inside it. You built ladders in a room with no ceiling. Only once you exit do you see it was never the problem. It was the lens, the emotional magnet that pulled every thought into orbit, and suddenly you feel light, untethered, dangerous, because now you're thinking with range, with raw clarity. People say they're stuck. What they mean is their paradigm has reached its expiration date. But instead of rewriting it, they double down. They learn more. Hustle harder, blame circumstances, but they're just accelerating inside a loop, making sharper turns, mistaking friction for transformation. Real change comes when you disrupt the pull, when you question the coordinates you've been navigating by, when you ask not what should I do, but what worldview is choosing for me right now? That question alone fractures the orbit. And make no mistake, your old paradigm will not go quietly. It will flood your mind with noise, with emotion, with truths that used to protect you. But you're no longer that version of yourself, and the rules you obeyed were designed for him, not for who you're becoming. If you continue to live under his paradigm, you will rebuild his life, his limits, his regrets, and call it fate. But fate is often just unchallenged thought. So you rise, not in rebellion, but in realization that the mind can be recentered, that the gravity can be reset, that belief is elastic, and from your new vantage point, everything below looks different. Not because life changed, but because the lens did. You no longer orbit doubt. You no longer curve around the same excuses. You fly a new path, dictated by vision, not programming. You think you're free because you make decisions. But freedom does not begin with decisions. It begins with awareness of what's making them. What governs your thoughts when you're tired? What assumptions lead you into the same patterns even after you've sworn you're done repeating them? The answer is simple. Unquestioned belief. Not the beliefs you posed, not the ones you say out loud, the ones so buried they've become invisible. And it is those, precisely those, that control you most, because they operate in the dark. And what operates in the dark doesn't ask for permission. It dictates. It decides. It drags you into patterns so familiar you no longer recognize them as choices. You call it your default mode. But that's just programming that was never challenged. You're not trapped by fate. You're imprisoned by what you refuse to examine. The mind is a temple built on unspoken laws, most of them written by hands you've never met. Generational voices, cultural scripts, childhood echoes. They whisper things like, "People like you don't do that," or "That kind of life is for them, not us." And you accept it, not because it's true, but because it's been repeated long enough to feel sacred. You don't question it because questioning feels disrespectful. But reverence for old beliefs is the graveyard of growth. You cannot outgrow what you defend, and you cannot rewrite what you refuse to read. The first step is demolition, not just of bad habits, but of the invisible logic that created them. Most people don't repeat behaviors because they want to. They repeat them because they're running on scripts they don't remember writing. You keep ending up in the same places because you're walking the same internal blueprint. Your external life is a reflection of your inner architecture, and every belief you never examined is a beam holding that structure together. Remove it, and the walls tremble. That trembling? That's growth. That's truth trying to emerge through the cracks. But if you run every time the walls shake, you'll spend your life rebuilding the same house with different paint. Demolition sounds violent. It is, but it's also sacred. Because when you finally ask, "Why do I think this way?" you trigger a collapse of everything false. Every identity inherited, every value absorbed but never chosen. You are not betraying your past, you are investigating it. You are holding it to the light and asking, "Does this belief still serve me, or is it simply familiar?" That question alone begins the break, and once it breaks, the repetition ends. Not immediately, not neatly, but irreversibly. The most dangerous belief is the one that works just well enough to justify keeping it. The idea that being liked is safer than being real. That playing small earns you approval. That suffering makes you virtuous. These beliefs aren't catastrophic. They're tolerable. And tolerable beliefs never feel urgent to challenge. But they cost you. They dilute your decisions. They make your life livable but never legendary. And that's how they win, by convincing you to settle for almost. Almost confident, almost ready, almost fulfilled. You want to know why you feel stuck? Trace it back. Every almost begins with an unquestioned belief. This is why awareness is demolition, because the moment you see the pattern, truly see it, it can no longer run silently. You hear its footsteps, you feel its pull, and with that recognition, the spell is broken. You are no longer the puppet, you're the observer. And observers choose. They disrupt, they redirect. You want to break the cycle? Don't start with behavior. Start with belief. Because behavior is the fruit. Jig there. But this is not a passive process. You will lose parts of yourself. You will stand in the rubble of your old identity and wonder what remains. That discomfort, that's the price. You don't get to keep the old lens and see a new world. You don't get to worship your survival instincts and build something revolutionary. You must burn the blueprint. Smash the foundation, sit in the dust of your former self and listen. That silence contains your real voice, the one buried beneath the noise of borrowed thought. You're not far. You're fogged. The life you want isn't beyond reach. It's just blocked by invisible belief structures you've never challenged. Structures built by repetition, not truth. Your job is not to tear them down with force. It's to question them so ruthlessly that they collapse under the weight of their own irrelevance. You don't fight lies, you reveal them. And the light of awareness does the rest. That is the demolition, that is the breakthrough. You're not addicted to patterns, you're addicted to familiarity. And every familiar action is fueled by an unseen assumption. Change the assumption and the action loses its power. This is the mechanics of identity shift. You don't become new by trying harder. You become new by removing the logic that built the old you. That logic was not fact, it was inherited, biased, reactive. Now it's your job to edit it, to become the architect. Belief systems don't collapse from outside pressure, they collapse from internal breach. They shatter not through opposition, but through inquiry. Every mental structure you live inside was built brick by brick with ideas you never tested. And yet you trust it, you obey it. You let it define what's safe, what's possible, what's off limits. But every system, no matter how fortified, contains backdoors, points of vulnerability that open the whole framework to collapse. And those access points aren't hidden in rituals or routines. They live inside the rules you were told never to question, the ones framed as sacred, the ones enforced not with logic, but with fear. The moment you touch one of those untouchable assumptions, the whole matrix shakes. That's where change begins, not with action, with inquiry. Think of your mind like a digital fortress, coded with unconscious programming. The commands are invisible, but they run your entire operating system. And just like any code, a single line, when rewritten, can reroute the whole machine. That single line is usually a sacred belief, one you are told is beyond question. You have to earn your worth. Success means sacrifice. Be realistic. They're presented as wisdom, but they function as shackles. And the moment you ask, what if that's not true, you puncture the code, the walls ripple, the system glitches. That's how change begins, not through defiance, but through curiosity that refuses to stay silent. You don't need to break all the rules. Just one sacred belief challenged with absolute honesty, and the framework begins to unravel. Because belief systems are interdependent. They lean on each other like a house of cards. Touch the right one, and the rest no longer makes sense. You realize, suddenly, that your behaviors weren't instinct. They were agreements. Silent contracts signed years ago, and once you see the terms, you can reject them. But first, you must violate the illusion of permanence. That's what inquiry does. It commits intellectual treason against your old identity. Most people live in defensive agreement with their mental architecture. They don't question, they defend. They don't inspect, they repeat. Because defending beliefs gives the illusion of certainty, and certainty feels like survival. But inquiry feels like chaos. It destabilizes. It makes things uncertain, and uncertainty exposes responsibility. Because if the belief was false, then who was driving your life all this time? That answer is painful. That answer is you. And most would rather serve an outdated paradigm than confront the truth of self-authorship. But if you're still reading, you've already crossed the line. You've already opened the door. This is how revolution begins, quietly, in the mind. You hear an old voice say, "That's just how life works," and instead of nodding, you pause. You tilt your head. You ask, "Says who?" That moment is atomic because the voice is always borrowed from a teacher, a parent, a culture, a fear. And when you trace it back, you realize it was never yours. You just inherited it. And now you have the power to disown it, not with rage, but with inquiry, with a calm, deliberate dismantling of the logic that shaped your former self. Every belief system contains contradictions, little fractures where lived experience and inherited doctrine no longer align. These are your back doors. When what you feel violates what you've been told to think, don't suppress it. Follow it. Track it like a thread unraveling a great machine. Because in that tension, you'll find the invitation to grow. Not to add new rules, but to escape the old prison entirely. You don't evolve by refining belief. You evolve by deleting what no longer holds. Truth under pressure, and pressure always comes through life experience. It reveals which beliefs stand, and which were just stories dressed as structure. The question is not to destroy, it is to refine, to scrape the rust from inherited truth and test what